Hi kids, welcome back to Sunday School Online. Today, which is 2 Sundays before the beginning of Great Lent, and it is the theme of the Last Judgment, I wanted to do something a little bit different. Instead of reading to you a comic book story from the Bible or kind of outlining the Last Judgment, I wanted to look at the epistle from church today. For those of you who may or may not know, when we do Divine Liturgy, we are always reading two different readings, one from the epistles, which are the letters of St. Paul or St. Peter or St. John, like different letters from the apostles to different communities. We read those, and then we also read an excerpt, a piece from the Bible on every Divine Liturgy. Usually the chanter reads the epistle reading, and then the priest reads the gospel reading. So today I want to take a look at the epistle reading of the day, which is very, very interesting because it talks about fasting, which is something that we are slowly starting to do and getting ready for the great fast of Great Lent for 40 days. And St. Paul in his epistle in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, at the end of chapter 8 and the beginning of chapter 9, which we'll be looking at today, speaks about the meaning of fasting and how important fasting is and how to do proper fasting. So let's take a look at a little bit of an infographic that I have prepared for you, and let's see what St. Paul is trying to tell us about fasting. Okay, kids, so we see here that we have this beautiful poster of St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. He wrote two letters that we have, the first letter and the second letter. This is the first one. And this Sunday, we were reading from chapter 8. You can see the overall structure of the epistle, and we see that St. Paul speaks about a lot of different things to the Corinthians as he's answering questions that they would write to him about, and also try to deal with problems within their community. So you see here that in the first 1 to 4 chapters, he talks about divisions and people kind of breaking off into different groups and fighting with each other. In chapters 5 to 7, he speaks about different types of sin that the Corinthians are dealing with. In chapters 8 to 10, which we will speak about today, he speaks about fasting and the types of food that we are to eat. In chapters 11 to 14, he speaks about the gathering and how people are supposed to come together and how they're supposed to pray together. And in chapters 15 and 16, he speaks about the resurrection. So we see that he structures his epistle in this way. And today we read from chapter 8, verses 8 to 13, and also the beginning of chapter 9, verses 1 to 2, which is right here in the center of the epistle. I'm going to read you the epistle reading of today so just we can hear what the Apostle Paul is saying about eating food and fasting. So the Apostle Paul says, "But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your right does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you, with all your knowledge, eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall." And he continues at the beginning of chapter 9. And he says, "Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not the result of my work in the Lord? Even though I may not be an apostle to others, surely I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord." So what is St. Paul trying to say here? He's speaking in this chapter about that when we fast or when we eat food, it's not so much what we eat, but why we are fasting and why we are eating certain things. So he brings up the example of food sacrificed to idols. So in the old days, when St. Paul was teaching, the Greek people were worshiping the 12 gods. As you can see here, this temple of Apollo here in the middle, and a lot of the people, the pagan Greeks who were not Christians yet, they were worshiping the 12 gods of Olympus. And the Apostle Paul, when he converted them to Christianity, he didn't want them, or it wasn't appropriate for them to be eating, kind of foods that were sacrificed to the fake gods, but rather to praise the real God and to pray to the real God. And so there was a lot of scandal happening when people were wanted to eat the foods that were sacrificed to the gods. And so the Apostle Paul was trying to tell the Corinthians that, we know better, and we know that these foods are not are not being used for real gods, because those are fake gods and there's only one true God. And so it doesn't really bother us whether we eat those foods or not. But if other people who don't know better, other people who have not heard about Christ, other people who have not heard about the real God, if they see you eating these foods, which are sacrificed to idols, then they might be tempted to believe in those other gods. And so he's basically saying that, even if you know better, even if you don't care what foods you eat, and if you don't care if those foods were sacrificed to idols, other people who are weaker in faith, or perhaps ignorant, they don't know a lot of things about the faith, they might get scandalized. So when you fast, he says, or when you choose what you're going to eat, you have to think about your brothers and sisters, about the other people around you. And so this is kind of like one of the lessons that the Apostle Paul is trying to teach us today, as we are slowly approaching, we are 2 weeks away from the beginning of the Great Fast, that when we fast from certain foods, we're doing it so that we can create self-control, and so that we can conquer our bodies, and that so that our minds and our souls and our hearts are more powerful than our bodies, and so that we can also remember the poor and help them. And he's also saying that the real reason why we fast is so that we can become better human beings, and so that we can be sensitive to other human beings and learn how to love other human beings, so that we're not selfish. And so even in our fasting, we should always kind of, think about other human beings. This is why a lot of times in our Orthodox tradition, we say that, when we fast, we should neither be, boastful and arrogant about it, telling everybody about how we fast and why we fast, but at the same time, we should also try to live by a good example to other human beings, right? So the Apostle Paul is trying to remind us that there's kind of like the proper way of fasting, and then there's also the wrong way of fasting. And if anything that we do scandalizes other people, makes other people feel bad, or makes other people feel, or makes them make the wrong decisions, or leads them to the wrong types of belief, then we shouldn't be doing those things. So the Apostle Paul, he says in his epistle, he says, if me eating meat, even though I'm allowed to eat meat on certain days, if me eating meat causes my brother to sin, then I will not eat meat, just for the sake of not having my brother sin. So, if somebody else, I'll give you a good example, kids. Some people, because maybe they're sick, or they have a cold, or they have a disease, they can't fast 100%. Like, they can't stop all their meat during the fast, or they can't stop all their milk. And so maybe even their spiritual father, the priest, has told them, that it's okay for them to drink milk, or to eat certain types of foods that usually you're not supposed to eat during the fast because they have a medical problem. Well, yeah, they may be allowed to eat those things, but they still shouldn't do it outside in public in front of other people who are trying to fast, because they might scandalize those people and make them think bad thoughts, or make them want to go and eat those things as well. So even if you have an exception to the rule, you should do it in your own home and not in front of other people. So the whole point is that always our fasting is not just a personal, private thing, but also it is something that has to do with the whole society and with all our brothers and sisters in the church. We do it for other people as much as we do it for ourselves. So that's the epistle for today. I know it's a little more complex and maybe a little more in-depth than what we usually talk about, but parents, I hope you're watching these videos with your kids, and if your kids have questions, maybe you can explain it a little bit deeper. But I think it's important to remember, to touch on some of the reasons we fast. We'll talk about this a little more in the upcoming weeks. But it's important to understand the whole essence and the whole kind of like ethos of the fast, why we fast, as opposed to only what we fast from, right? So it's important to understand why and the reason behind it, so that we can have meaning to our fast during the Great Fast and the preparation for Holy Pascha. And of course, we will kind of look at different scenarios and talk about this a little more in depth in the upcoming week. So I'll see you all next week, kids. God bless you, and have a wonderful Sunday.